Hey, how's it going? So let's take a look at the second half of this part on the literature of this section. The first person we're going to look at is Oluda Equiano. He wrote an autobiography called The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Oluda Equiano in 1789. And this is an important work because it's a universal narrative that's the story of many Africans that were brought to America. We're going to see a lot of the African American writings here in this section and the section after this. They're important contributions. We've seen Native American contributions. It's important to see all different types of people, different backgrounds, and how they contribute to letters, what they have to say, and also, very importantly, how they say it. Because the way you deliver a message is very important for the audience to whom you want to reach. Here's a picture of him here. You could see how he's dressed for the times, and he's holding a document in his hand also. So in America, he was able to buy his freedom, and after this he became a spokesperson of nearly 1 million slaves in America. He became a Christian and used liturgical language to solicit interest in his cause. And the idea, liturgical is church using language that involves Christianity and, the liturgy, using liturgical language to talk about, Christianity and, his faith and how he became a Christian, to appeal to the people to whom he's speaking, to get the idea across of how bad slavery is in America. We're going to take a look at this right here. So this is from the introduction. He says here, "Permit me with the greatest deference and respect." And notice we have greatest deference and respect because he's appealing to people and, with all due respect, I need to explain this to you. "To lay at your feet the following genuine narrative, the chief design of which is to excite in your august assemblies a sense of compassion." So here he explicitly points out that he's searching for a sense of compassion. "For the miseries," we've got an opposition word, "which the slave trade has entailed on my unfortunate countrymen." So here he is saying, representing his group here, of the miseries that the slave trade has brought forth to them. "By the horrors," once again, "of the trade was I first torn away from the tender connections that were naturally dear to my heart." So we've got horrors and miseries opposing, obviously, with the tender connections that were naturally dear to his heart. So he's creating these oppositions so people can understand, how it was for him, what happened, and how he's able to come about to explain this to the audience. And it continues, "But these, through the mysterious ways of providence, I ought to regard as infinitely more than compensated by the introduction I have thence obtained to the knowledge of the Christian religion." So here he's pointing out how he did become a Christian and how this is important in his own identity. And obviously, his integration into American culture here by becoming a Christian, he came about, per se, and now as a fellow Christian, he's talking to his readers to try to convince them of what is going on. "And a nation of which, by its liberal sentiments, its humanity and glorious freedom of its government." So we've got this word humanity. "And its proficiency in arts and sciences has exalted the dignity of human nature." So we've got humanity and human nature. So he's saying here that the United States exalts these properties. And this is important to point out because, slave trade is very inhumane, which goes against the humanity and the human nature. And in the arts and sciences here, the idea that the proficiency in arts and sciences, the developments that have come about since, in the Enlightenment and since the development of the nation, and his, this writing is a contribution to that. Let's take a look here at John Trumbull. This is a very smart fellow. He passed the entrance exams to get into Yale when he was just 7 years old, but he didn't go till he was a teenager. So he's an American poet known for his satire. Take a look at this picture of him here. You can see he's got that gaze there, and writes satire. Very witty fellow. Once again, notice the type of picture we've got here. We've seen a lot of portraits of people. That's pretty much during the neoclassic era, one of the main types of paintings. And obviously, it's very important during this time to note that a portrait is, before photography, a portrait is something that is going to, have the person endure for as long as the portrait exists. This poem he wrote in 1769 is a type of poem designed for the bride on her way to consummating her marriage. So this particular poem he wrote with wit and scholarship. I'm going to show you this to you in a sec. But I just wanted to explain another poem that I'm going to show you right after that, part of a poem, Progress of Dullness, in which he's criticizing educational techniques. And once again, think about the contrast in these two different types of poems. Let's take a look at the first one here. So, sing then, my muse, in lofty Corambo, how Hymen came with lighted flambeau. Notice the rhyme scheme all of here. We've got AABB going down here. How Hymen, to kindle fire of love between them and make their livers burn within them. And you can see here, between them and within them. It's part of the satirical, witty style that he has here. Juno, it seems, by sad mishap, o'ernight with Jove, was pulling cap. For by what way she wont to govern, so Homer tells the henpecked sovereign. But now stole off and left him fretting, and rode post-haste to come to wedding. So, these words here, henpecked, wont to govern, pulling cap, fretting and wedding, a lot of the witty schemes here and rhymes, and it's just a very fun poem that he wrote here about that. So I want you to kind of compare that to Progress of Dullness, the excerpt here. So, to the priest in form he goes, prepared to study and to doze. The parson in his youth before had run the same progress o'er. So check out, once again, we've got the rhyme scheme here. Goes, doze, before, o'er. Keep going. His sole concern to see with care his church and farm in good repair. His skill in tongues that once he knew had bid him long a last adieu. Away his Latin rules had fled, etc., etc. But, here we've got the contrast between, his skill in tongues had bid him long adieu. So he lost his ability to speak in foreign languages. Away his Latin rules had fled. Those disappeared. I mean, if you continue reading the poem, you see how obviously people look towards the church for their education. They look towards the church as an institution. And this is, in this excerpt here, we see a criticism of an older priest that had lost a lot of his ways. John Trumbull, take a look at him. His major work was the comic epic Mafingo. This rash but deliberate epigrammic form was a popular style of poem in America for its political poignancy during the Revolution. So when we look at this, things that kind of hit at, we need things that spark, that are like spurs, things that are biting, so we can, things that criticize in different types of ways. Satire, which is very big during the Enlightenment. We've got, wit. It was part of satire, but we've got, all these different types of genres that are working towards, expressing this idea of revolution and the idea of change. So this was a poem that was condemned abroad. All right, so it was condemned abroad. Why was it condemned abroad? Obviously because, British don't want to promote this type of thing, so obviously they're going to censor it. But it was solicited widely in the United States. Yes, it was solicited widely in the United States for its focus on independence and self-governance. Yes, people here wanted things that were biting, that were revolutionary, that promoted change, that thought about different ideas, that challenged the status quo. What was the status quo? Britain. So here's an excerpt from that. When Yankees, skilled in martial rule, first put the British troops to school, Yankees, British, instructed them in warlike trade and maneuvers of parade, the true war dance of Yankee reels, and manual exercise of heels, made them give up like saints complete the arms of flesh and trust the feet. Once again, this is just an excerpt, but it's very interesting to see the idea of Yankee here and the idea of opposition to British and some of the criticism that this does explain. Let's take a look here at James Madison. So now we're moving up a bit. He's fourth president of the U.S., and he's one of the founding fathers. This is a term that I keep mentioning, but just wanted to kind of put this in this particular slide so give you an idea. The historian Richard Morris in 1973 claimed that the founding fathers were, here we got John Adams and Ben Franklin and Alexander Hamilton and John Jay and Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, and George Washington. And these individuals are all very important in their contribution to the development of the United States, presidency, the development of, Constitution, Declaration of Independence, a lot of the additional things that they wrote, politics, etc. But it's also, I think, for the purpose of this course and the purpose of, what American identity is, it's important to note that, yes, these are all men, and the patriarchal establishment of, their contribution is very important, but we have many voices here. We've got voices from within, voices from without, different people talking about different things from different perspectives, and a lot of the time, those perspectives coincide, other times they don't. So just please keep in mind the diversity that we're talking about here when we discuss a lot of these different writers. And here's a picture of him here. You can see once again, we've got the pose, the portrait, very popular, like I expressed before, during the Enlightenment. So he's considered the father of the Constitution because of his work on the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Do you need to go back and read the entire Constitution and the Bill of Rights? I'm sure you have an idea of what they're about. It's important to, these are letters, these are part of what American writing is about. Especially now, it's very important during the Enlightenment to think about this idea of identity and governance and establishing new rules for the people in the United States. And his contribution to this is very important. Learning about this just in grade school all the way up through this CLEP exam here. So along with Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, he wrote the Federalist Papers, which were written in support of the Constitution. Now, I'm not going to put in a sample of this here, but this is just an example, just like other things that we're reading here. So please, just wanted to remind you to use this video to watch a number of times to remember some of the names. Look up some of the things that I am recommending you here. I'm glad we're taking a look at some of the excerpts because it gives you an idea of the different styles, themes, content, opposition, etc. of a lot of these writers, but I just wanted to reiterate once again to go through and use the additional resources that we provide, the texts, the links to the texts, and also on the internet to do more searches to find information about more on the Federalist Papers, more on the Founding Fathers, contributions in particular of these individuals I'm mentioning here. So Philip Freneau, sometimes called the poet of the American Revolution. Now he's got, he's got poetry here that fluxes between the Revolutionary War and the countryside. His subject matter is pretty diverse. It's important to notice also how we've got different types of writing. I think I've mentioned this before, but the diversity of what we're writing here is important. It's how poetry and documents, essays, treatises, memoirs, biographies, talk about the self, talk about the self as representative of a group of people. They talk about a group of people of how they are or how they want to change. And, this is his contribution to that. So here's a picture of him here. Once again, portrait. You could take a look here. It looks like it's an etching. The bottom isn't complete there, so looks like a nice drawing there. His contribution here, The Beauties of Santa Cruz and The House of Night, are two of his more famous poems. You may want to do a quick search. You'll find all of these poems in their full length online. The older poems like this, copyright, there's no copyright laws on them, I don't think, so they're all completely published online, and you can take a look at them and find reviews on them and stuff like that. So, but just I wanted to point out something else. After being captured by the British, he wrote a biting verse as seen in The British Prison Ship. So it's interesting to see how people always write from their own experience, and his turn to write in a sharper voice against the British based off of his own personal experiences is noted here. Let's take a look at an excerpt of The House of Night. Too clearly joined to sickness, toils, and pains, perhaps the former crimes imprisoned here. True to itself, the immortal soul remains and seeks new mansions in the starry sphere. So a lot of the words here, sickness, toils, and pains, immortal soul remains, the starry sphere, a lot of different ideas here about, the House of Night. It's got this feeling of, grandeur and feeling of, this is a space that we want to create. When nature bids thee from the world retire, with the joy thy lodging leave, a fated guest in paradise, the land of thy desire, existing always, always to be blessed. Once again, we've got blessed and guest. These two rhyme here. Retire and desire. These two rhyme here. And you can see how that is A-B style here. And that is also the same for the verse above it. And, you can see a style here. Notice how he puts nature, paradise, here with uppercase, very important words to point out in his own philosophy. Let's take a look here at Phyllis Wheatley. So she was the first African-American writer to publish a book in the United States. Poems on various subjects, religious and moral. This was published in 1773. Now, this is important because people didn't think she was the actual author of her work. How could she write this? This is something that only educated people could write. But she went to court and she defended herself to show that she was the actual author of it. And the contribution here is pretty remarkable, to not just write the poetry, but stand in front of a group of people and explain. Obviously, she wrote it, so there's no doubt about that. But just being able to explain with logic, and this whole idea of logic is important because it's the Enlightenment, and just the fact that she had to, through reason, back up her claim about her own creative style is kind of interesting for the era here. So she wrote about religion and politics, and criticized slavery. Now this is part of one of her poems here. "'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land." And notice here, mercy and pagan taught my benighted soul to understand that there's a God and there's a Savior too. So once again, the Christian style, liturgical style, she really wants to point out that she is a Christian and she was saved by Christianity. And this liturgical language is important for, to appeal to the people to whom she is writing. "Once I redemption neither sought nor knew, some view our sable race with scornful eye. Their color is a diabolical dye. Remember Christians, Negroes black as Cain, may be refined and join the angelic train." very explicit here, noticing how, remember, my audience that I'm speaking to, that African Americans can be refined and join the angelic train of Christianity. So, yes, why is there such opposition to, to Africans in this sense? When, people like me that have written this poetry, defended myself in court, and, obviously I'm writing to you in this same type of language that you are familiar with. I have become a Christian. I am not any different than you are. And, once again, as we've seen from other writers, she is appealing to an audience by explaining herself as a converted Christian, or as becoming a Christian, and as one that is an example of what can be accomplished if people will listen to what she says. And here we've got Alexander Hamilton, once again, seen this word many times. Just wanted to mention him here towards the end. Important also to talk about Alexander Hamilton. Very interesting life this man had. Once again, he was involved in the Federalist Papers that supported the Constitution. You might want to just research, like I said before, this idea of the Federalist Papers to get an idea of these different people and how they contributed to that. Here's a picture of him here. You may have seen that before. So, you'd think everyone's in the boat together, but there's obviously some rivalry between the founding fathers. There's bound to be some rivalry between people. They're not all going to align their ideas together. So we see here how he was a political rival of Thomas Jefferson. But he was. There's a lot of. I have some friends that are involved in a society in his name, and there's speeches that are given. A lot of. He was born outside of the United States, I believe, and then he's a lot of the different places where he's worked and he lived. There's a lot of lectures and stuff in his name, and very interesting fellow. But he was anti-slavery and promoted religious freedom. But it's interesting to see this whole idea of duels. Back in the days when people had duels, you'd have people they'd have two guns and they'd establish a place and they'd say, let's meet there at dawn. And maybe you've seen this in movies and stuff, but you walk a certain number of steps and turn and then fire and see what happens. So he dies in a duel with Jefferson's vice president, Aaron Burr. And so that's, this whole idea of extremosity, political thought, not being passive, being someone that fights for what they believe in. The connection with, faith of change and the revolutionary cause. It's very, very important and poignant in this idea, and to see how this particular fellow died, finished his life on this emotional flare is very important in this whole idea of independence and thought of change and personal belief.